I really feel a little bit like I drew the short straw, being the last one at the end of what's been a brilliant day. I also feel like the interloper, because I've only been doing internal comms for about the last year. Most of my career has been either journalism or external comms, so I am not the enemy, but I'm certainly new to internal comms. And just, there we go. I wanted to talk a little bit about where I sit within GSK, talk you through GSK, and then talk you through something we've been doing around bringing strategy to life within the company. And I guess one of the first things is that I'm very lucky in GSK to sit within comms and government affairs, and we're one group. We all sit together, internal, external, brand, government affairs, etc. And our head is on our central leadership team, so the C-suite, which is brilliant because it gives us a seat at the table. But it doesn't make it any easier to tell our corporate strategy. And this statistic, it's interesting because earlier we had a 70%, this is a 95%, it is what it is, but basically, and we just heard from Kevin that essentially, if they don't understand your corporate strategy, then how are they going to be able to connect that through to the work that the teams are doing? So that's what we were looking at. And this is who we are and a little bit of the challenges behind what we do. We are a really heavily regulated industry, and that makes some things particularly difficult. But as a company, we have three particular big bits of business, which is prescription medicines, vaccines, and consumer healthcare, and we're probably pretty big in all of those. And we have a big global diverse workforce. So there's more than 100,000 of us, and we've got about 40% of them who aren't online, so quite a few of them are on computers and use our internet to a greater or lesser extent. But they're all over the place. Those who are on the factory floors don't have the computers. They, don't read newspapers either, I'm afraid, because we've got clean environments, so they can't leave them lying around. And when you're going through something like a mandatory training program, we're probably translating those materials into about 26 different languages. So there's a few challenges with it. And we're probably got loads of brands, but people don't know who we are. And the reason people don't know who we are a lot of the times, partly our brands don't generally have the name GSK plastered all over it, but also the stuff that we do, which transforms lives, let's be honest, patients take an asthma medicine and they find it easier to breathe or whatever, but we can't talk about that to the general public. The only people we can talk to about prescription medicines and vaccines are to the people who prescribe them, so the governments or healthcare practitioners, doctors, nurses, etc. And that makes it really quite difficult to tell a story. And it makes it difficult to tell a story externally, but because we're heavily regulated and we have a lot of lawyers, it makes it quite difficult to tell the story inside sometimes. And what we have is some of our internal comms content frequently sounds like our press release because it is our press release. And our press releases are written to get through regulatory requirements. So when I talk about an asthma medication, I don't talk about an asthma medication. I will have to tell you that the indication is for patients with severe asthma of high eosinophilia of blah, 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 and not to be used in such and such. And by the way, there are risks with taking that medicines. So you can see it makes it a bit of a challenge sometimes to get our employees quite excited when we get a new medicine through approvals. And that might have taken 10 to 12 years to do it too. But we've got a lot of stuff that we can be proud of if we can learn how to tell the stories internally and externally. And how this all came about is a couple of years ago, we did a little bit of two things. One, we had an employee survey, because you all have employee surveys. And our employees were telling us that they're really proud about what we do as a company, but they're not quite sure why. And as somebody who came from having looked after our external social media channels, our Facebook, I knew they were proud because every time we posted something on Facebook, they went, oh, so proud, which is great. Love the fact that they're proud, but they can't articulate to their family, their friends, the people they work with, why exactly it is they're proud about working for GSK. And surprise, surprise, they felt disconnected from our corporate strategy. I have to say, I wasn't quite aware of our corporate strategy until a number of years ago. I got the joy of developing our annual report. And I certainly learned about corporate strategy in that one. And the employee survey findings coincided with a very large piece of work we'd done with external audiences. So we did a large reputation survey, and we did it across 10 of our big markets. And we surveyed government officials, we surveyed media, we surveyed what we would call the informed public. So people had an interest in healthcare. And what they told us is that they're not sure about what we do. But when they do work with us, or when they get to know us, they actually like us. And that's quite difficult because we're a pharmaceutical company, well, we're a globally led science healthcare company. And it makes you in a slightly difficult situation because we do make money off of people being ill, and that sometimes can be quite difficult. Not that I've seen anybody else come up with medicines in a different way. And as I've just said, they're unaware of the heritage of our products. So they probably all know the blue inhaler. Almost everybody who knows somebody with asthma knows the blue inhaler. And the product that's in that is something that we discovered at our labs a number of years ago, but it doesn't have GSK plastered all over it. So they're not associating that medicine with us. And out of that backdrop, and at the same time, GSK had gone through a number of changes, we were also refreshing the brand. So we were given the goal within internal comms, well, actually within internal and external, and myself particularly looking after our corporate narrative. And our goal with both the narrative, the tone of voice, all that work, and the brand refresh was to increase pride internally and our reputation externally. And we wanted to think, behave, and be seen as one company. And that may seem pretty obvious to most people. It wasn't quite obvious to us. I'll show you why in a minute. But the brief then was to create a corporate narrative. We wanted it to be consistent. We wanted it to be adaptable because it had to work across all those different audiences, flexible, accessible. And then the simple bit was support uptake and get it used. Piece of cake, right? Across 100,000 people. And it seems pretty easy as a concept, but I don't know how much this might relate to many of you in the big companies. We are a really complicated structure, really, really complicated. And you've got people who feel that they can do communications across various different parts. So within that, if you look at that's how we're structured, and each of those people had a business unit lead, and each of those business unit leads had really clear views about what they were going to say and the story that they were going to tell about GSK, down to the point that, I do not lie, one of those was working on some materials to come up with their own mission statement that they were going to be using externally. So, I mean, I don't know. I thought we only had one mission statement as a company, which was to do more, feel better, live longer, but no, they felt they needed to come up with their own. So it was a real challenge. We had a group that was used to being heavily franchised, that had a lot of independence. They were telling different stories, and they were emphasizing different bits, even though we'd had a CEO come in, it's now 8 years ago, who started out by saying we have 5 strategic priorities and that's what we're going to align behind. And we weren't going to change those strategic priorities the whole time he was there. Yet, the businesses were going off and slightly changing what they wanted to do. So how did we go off and solve it? Well, the first bit is that create the narrative, that really great big piece of cake, to pull all these people together and find out what would unite them. We did have the benefit of having just done the reputation survey and found out what people liked about us, so what they understood when they heard about it. We knew what things they really liked. And so we sat down and we came up with a narrative, and I've got one slide for the narrative, and I wish I could say it was easy as that. It actually took us probably about 6-7 months. We used both the reputation survey and our annual report as a little bit of a basis of how are we going to construct it. And it needed to work internally and externally. There's no point telling one story outside and telling a different story inside. And in the end, the narrative is 7 pages handwritten, 7 pages Word document typed. And I was against this because I thought, oh God, I'm not going to write word for word what we want people to say. But actually in the process, it became easier to write it down and then tell people, this is the general structure, now go away and think about it, see how you could use it. Like Sarah from Clark's, we did something very similar in that we had a really small group responsible for this. There were only 3 of us. We did an awful lot of consulting though. We have something within GSK that's called a RACI, which is essentially you take all your stakeholders and you identify them as either responsible, accountable, consulted, or informed. Pretty much fixed on the grid, you know. These are the guys who I really don't want to screw up my project, so what am I going to do to keep them involved and make sure they're happy with it? And there were a lot of stakeholders that we involved, things that we wanted to really stress test with them and make sure that we got it right. So for instance, I don't know if any of you saw the Lucy Kellaway piece a couple of weeks ago on corporate values. How many people know their corporate values? I can actually recite ours, but what she did is had a group of management or managers, and she ran up a bunch of values from different companies that were the values of the companies that those people represented, and not a one of them could identify which one were their company values. And actually what also happened was that I think out of the top 5 corporate values, GSK had 3 of them. We only have 4 values. Our 4th one is patient focus, and I wouldn't expect that many other companies to have that. But what it shows you is that corporate values as a thing, as a statement, probably isn't really resonating. And we had a big debate about were we going to mention the values. And where we got to is actually said, no, we do a quick reference to them, but then we talk about the behaviors, because ultimately that's what's important. It's how your employees are living those values. So over the course of about 6-9 months, we developed, went back and forward. We came up with what essentially is the structure of a number of themes. So this is the stuff about GSK, and this is what you, anywhere in the business, should understand and be able to tell that as a company, this is what we are about. And then to illustrate each of them, there were proof points. There were things that brought it to life. So a really big part of what we do is around innovation. So we talked about how innovation was spread throughout the company, not just in our labs, but in terms of how we might approach problem solving from a business perspective. And you had a proof point or a couple of proof points that could support that. And that allowed other groups to develop their particular proof points. So what you could have is our colleagues in Germany could come up with their own local proof point about what the business had meant. So we were consistently telling the same story, but allowing people to adapt it. And as it was a big, long written document, and I really didn't expect people to use it, I was quite surprised because we have used it. And we have used a lot of the words that were in there because we also got the lawyers to approve it, and that was a feat in itself. But what we found is that when people need to come up with a quick half-page ad in a business magazine, they've got the copy, it's already approved. There's somewhere in there that will live to that, get the picture in place, and pull that copy on board. So we got the final narrative and sort of sent some information out, said, here's what you can do with it, here's how to use it. But we didn't send it out to all 100,000 employees because actually this is something that we needed to make the company understand how to use it. And what we did was first we started out with the people in our communications and government affairs function. You talk about having 6, Sasha. Our network is a little bit bigger than that. We probably, when you count everybody up across the various markets and everything that they do, we have about 350. So somehow or other we had to get 350 people understanding how to use this, what to do with it, how to then take it, use it with their leadership teams so that their leadership teams felt that they owned it, that they could adapt it and make it theirs, and then that their leadership teams began to use it. And when we started with a simple piece of a written Word document that's now PDF. We then built a section within our intranet. So this is the section that supports our comms and government affairs team. And we put everything up there. And then we put it down as downloadable PDFs, whatever. All the artwork behind it went onto our brand library, so that it didn't matter where you went, you could download it. And then we did the 4-page dummy guide, the 4-page fill it in yourself guide. And this is the bit that everybody's loved. Print out 4 pages, it takes you through it, and you fill in your own examples. And that allows you to adapt it. And then just in case you had one of those leadership teams who was a real challenge and didn't see the value of it, or you weren't quite sure how to go it, there's the step-by-step guide that says, actually, if you're having, if you're starting out new, this is what you need to do. These are who you need to get together. This is when you need to bring legal or medical into it so that you don't get all the way there and suddenly they kill it. And once we did that, once we had the leaders beginning to use it, we also thought, actually, there's employees out there, and employees constantly going out and talking about us. They're looking for stuff online. And what we said, they need a wealth of materials, and it's about time we refreshed everything anyway. So we had an old, boring PowerPoint template. Let's change it completely. We had a corporate video that was well out of date, so we changed that completely, and we changed the employee brochure. And we put all of that together and made everything adaptable. So the PowerPoint starts with two page within the PowerPoint that says, this is what you need to do with this to make it yours. This is where you need to approve it. And the video, which we did in animation, that was a story in itself in terms of why we did an animation. One of our brand images was about using people, lots of people, pictures of people and our employees. But what the feedback we got as a company with 100,000 is you couldn't possibly represent all of them. So we've now got blue scientists. The whole thing is an animation. We took it and translated it into 9 other languages, made it available to everybody, and put it out internally and externally. And that was one of the key bits for all of these materials, is that it has to be internal and external. Stuff that I'd do again. I'll take you through this and then I'll show you just a few examples of where it's been taken up. Stuff I'd do again. One document built around the themes and the proof points. I've had a lot of feedback and surveys from the people who have used it that this has really helped them make it relevant to their bit of the business. The themes have allowed for flexibility. The fill-in-the-blanks documents, so that guidelines, where they can just fill in whatever they want. All of the artwork files have been uploaded onto the Brand Hub, as I mentioned, and that means that people are downloading them all the time. Things from the animation themselves, all those artwork files are there, and they've taken them, they've adapted them, they've put them up behind receptions in markets, just. The translations being done at the center and made available to everybody has meant it's a lot easier for people to do it, and they're not being expected to pay for it down in the markets. And then afterwards, we did a series of tailored roadshows out to each market and talked them through how they could adapt it. So just some really quick examples of how things have been taken up and what they've done with it. The creativity I've been really impressed with. This is an example of what our German colleagues have done, taken it into a brochure. They give this brochure out to every new employee. They make every new employee go through the film. It's all sort of an onboarding process, but they also hand it out. Hong Kong has done something similar. And then it's not just internal materials for external use, but across the board, we've been on revising all of our corporate websites. And that same story about what we do, who we are, is appearing across them, all based on the narrative. And on the basis that Kevin's going to ask me about measurement, we're just going into the new employee survey, and we're just about to conduct a new reputation survey. So I can't wait to see whether we have actually made a difference to both the internal engagement and understanding of our corporate strategy and where we sit externally. And questions?